Yo, hey everyone, Weeks here, back with another video. This is going to be a build guide for a character I've been playing a little bit on stream and then over the weekend and kind of trying to min-max it some more. And this is kind of, I think as far as I'm going to take the character, this is basically as good as it's going to get. And I'm pretty happy with it, so I was going to send it out there in case this is a build that any of you guys want to play. This is a Vindictive Slam, Void Arrow, Rain of Arrows, Huntress character. So to quickly talk about the build, it's going to revolve around this Reaper here, which is the Vindictive Slam Reaper. This is the primordial version. So it has a ton of text, but basically what it does is it gives you an effect for different components of the game. So based on your max life, you're going to get a chance to trigger a Vindictive Slam, which is a hammer that falls out of the sky and does damage. Now, if you stack armor, you also get increased size. If you stack Ellie resist, you get increased damage. And if you stack melee damage reduction, projectile damage reduction, or area damage reduction, you get stun chance. And then the primordial version makes it to where your Reaper damage is added to Ellie damage instead of skill. And then it also makes it to where when the hammers fall, it's going to do a consecrated ground effect, which is going to be a damage over time, which would just help clean up some enemies. And then the downside is it makes your raw damage 0. So, and the Reaper itself gives you HP and a little bit of life regen, but that's not really a big deal. With the Reaper, we are using this Ultimatum. So this Ultimatum gives us area damage reduction, 57.5%. So that's where the stun chance is coming from on here, which is the bottom section before you get to the blue text. Then we are stacking a decent amount of HP to get a chance to trigger the slam. And we're stacking as much armor as possible to increase the size, as much Ellie resist as possible to increase the damage. And yeah, this is the build we've come up with. So, that's my Reaper and Ultimatum. We'll also talk about the runes. I'm using the rune of Hagen. So this requires us to do Ancestral Strike damage. So we will be doing crits and Ancestral Strikes. That's kind of how the build is just going to revolve around. I'm using Thornbite rune because we're stacking all this defense anyway. Stacking all this defense is going to now give us a shield. And if this gets nerfed, we'll probably switch it to this damage one here that just gives us more critical strike damage, Ancestral Strike damage, critical strike chance, and Ancestral Strike chance. And then lastly, we are reducing the constraint. If they nerf this one, then I'll probably switch out the constraint for this one here. That will give us the 300% effect. So with that, that would give us 300% critical strike damage and 900% Ancestral Strike damage. So just a ton of damage. But until then, we're just going to leave it with the Thornbite plus the constraint rune, and our activations will be Ancestral Strike damage. So, as far as the gear and the stats go, we already mentioned we're trying to stack HP, we're trying to stack armor, trying to stack elemental resist, we're trying to stack damage reductions. We're also trying to stack some attack speed, some projectiles, because we're doing Void Arrow. We're also doing critical strike chance, Ancestral Strike chance, Ancestral Strike damage. So that'll be mainly most of the gear. We're also stacking evasion, because with this chest, evasion is going to be turned into armor. And then with our attributes, armor is going to be converted into elemental resist. So that's how we get these numbers here. This evasion, it's like a fake number. It's there, which counts for the Thornbite rune. But as far as evasion actually goes, this makes it to where we don't dodge. So it doesn't actually work. So, but this armor does work, and this Ellie resist works. Also, when we get hit, we're going to get additional armor, which will give us additional Ellie resist, which will give us additional shield on the Thornbite rune. So it all kind of just works together. And that also gives us additional Vindictive Slam size and damage. So everything folds into each other. All right, so the rest of the gear. Our helm, we're doing the max life multiplier helm. It'll be pretty self-explanatory. We're trying to stack HP. It's the only one that can stack HP or any of the other stuff we're trying to stack. As far as stats go, I rolled for pure evasion gear just to have, so I can upgrade them as I make new builds. So don't worry about pure stats unless you really want to, but this is our gear. Evasion, max life, ancestral strike damage, ancestral strike chance. We also have some flat elemental damage, percent evasion, and projectile speed. And you want to do Similion's affinity, which is this Reaper. You want to do it on all your pieces, at least 10 out of them if you want to roll for max. So you want the plus 50 for the Reaper. You could roll like some 4s and roll it on every piece, which I believe is what I did. But anyway, then you want to do Void Arrow Mastery, which is how we're doing most of our damage, besides the hammers. And attributes, we showed them off before. We'll explain why we're picking these in a moment. But that's that piece of gear. Then we're moving on to the shoulders. This is the additional projectiles. Stats are basically the same, except there is fork chance. So we're trying to get a little bit of fork. We are up to 82%. So we have a few rolls. I think we have 2 pure stat rolls, and we have some secondary stats somewhere in here, in addition to Void Arrow giving us 10 pierce, 10 fork, 10 rebound. You also want to get 100% rebound just to keep the arrows in the air as long as possible. But yeah, shoulders are very good. Additional projectiles. Next, since we're doing crit, we're just doing the crit bracers. Nothing else really matters. So almost every time we hit for the first time, it's going to be a crit. If we look at our actual critical strike chance, we're at 71%. So with this gives us a 115% multiplier, which should bring us to 100 or close to it. And then we also have a then moving on to our gloves, we reduce the cooldown of our skill, which just makes Void Arrow attack faster. This one I didn't make legendary. You could use any legendary you like. Probably the poison tick one, where each time a poison ticks, there's a 5% chance that it spreads the poison, since we are doing some poison with Void Arrow. Ember Treads, this is not a good legendary for this at all. You could use the one where if you're missing health, you have percent armor. I'm rarely missing health with a Thornbright rune, but maybe if they nerf it, then that will be what I pick up. There's also the legendary that when you're standing still, you get some damage reduction, which will give you additional chance to stun. But it's kind of up to you. They're all kind of fine. None are super great. This one is very important though. This is the Ring 2. This is the one that gives you +1 to every ancestral strike or ancestral gift in your ancestral tree. So that works really well with our current ancestral tree, which I guess we'll talk about now. This one doesn't really matter. It gives you raw damage, which gets reduced to 0. It gives you critical strike damage, which we're not really looking for. We're just looking to do ancestral strike damage, so you can kind of ignore that one. But it's the only way we can get to this point up here. Next, we're getting flat LE and percent LE. That's great. And it gives you +1 rank from that ring. So it's just a little extra. It's not too amazing yet. This one, though, it gives you 2 out of 1. So instead of having 42%, we have 84%. And that percent is based off of the mastery of these. So I have 15 out of 15, 15 out of 15, and 12 out of 15. So that's 42 out of 45. If we finish this one out, we would have 90% here instead of this 84. So a lot of percent damage coming from that. And then lastly, you have flat LE damage based off of 16% of your max life. Since we're stacking max life, that's going to give us LE damage. Just kind of all works together. This one doesn't matter here, but yeah, flat LE based on our life. So that's that ring. Next, we're moving on to the belt. So this is the stagger belt. This is what I normally call it. And it staggers 20% of the damage. Since we're doing ancestral strikes, this is going to basically, we're just going to take 20% less damage because we're going to be wiping off that stagger all the time. Next, we're using the soul eating mantle. So we do have poisons in the build. Having poisons in the build allows us to do damage over times, and that will let us scale this up. So every time the poison ticks, it's going to do 3.4% of the enemy's HP. As we scale this up, we might get up to like 5%. We also might start using the Ferocious Affinity rune. So we'd have 2 dots. It really just depends. That'd be something I would switch out if there were really tanky modifiers in, say, the Forge. We already talked about the chest, but just to show the stats and talk about it, it gives us an evasion multiplier, so we're stacking evasion. It also gives us armor equal to 100% of our evasion. So we're stacking evasion, that stacks armor, and then with the attributes, we're turning that into elemental resist. We are doing Reaper damage is added to LE damage and as skill damage. That's redundant with our weapon. But what this lets me do is I can switch between any Reaper and still be doing LE because all my other stuff is set up for LE. So it just lets me play around with other Reapers if I want. You could pick any amulet you want here. All right, let's talk about attributes. So if we go into our attributes, we'll quickly talk about them. So we're mainly going for toughness. This will give us some more armor, some more max life, some percent armor. We go for some tenacity. I would love to get the second tenacity one, but I couldn't find a great way to do it. Might get rid of either Reaper damage multiplier or maybe some ancestral crit chance, but decided not to yet. I would switch it out if, you know, maybe you're getting netted or something a lot. You could switch out for more tenacity. But the big points gives us LE resist equal to 25% of your armor, so we get a lot of LE resist there. And then this one gives us melee damage reduction for every enemy within a 3-yard radius. So that just helps with the stuns on our Vindictive Slam. In Savagery, we get the Reaper damage multiplier and Reaper damage multiplier, so we get 25% of that, which will give us additional here because our Reaper is giving us LE damage instead of skill damage. Next, we go here for a little bit of evasion and critical strike chance. Here we go for some mana and ancestral strike chance. And this one we are going for attack speed just to help the build feel better. Getting some Reaper damage, max Reaper damage, and some projectile speed, which is these last 2 points. If you don't need the speed, you could maybe get the tenacity up here, or go for critical strike damage, or you could switch out everything and go for evasion multiplier if you want. But this is what worked best for me, so this is what I'm doing. Feel free to mess around with those and pick whatever works best for you. All right, let's talk about the skills. So we're using Void Arrow. Void Arrow is an interesting mechanic. It has this black hole mechanic here, which we'll talk about. But one reason you want to stack Fork Chance is you can do Void Arrow has increased damage. It's equal to twice your Fork Chance. If you instead did Pierce, you could do this one here. That's going to give you a 1-to-1 ratio with your Pierce chance. I did Fork to get the double damage. Next, this allows your Void Arrow to be charged up to 600 charges, which basically just means a ton of damage. Usually the charging takes forever, so we're using this one down here that while tormented, Void Arrow charges instantly. And to remember, to be tormented, you need to not cast the same skill over and over again. So what we're doing is we're casting Void Arrow, then Rain of Arrows, Void Arrow, Rain of Arrows, but they have around the same cast time, 0.41 seconds. 0.39 seconds. So what ends up happening is you just stay, you're tormented and then you're one away from tormented, then you're tormented, then you're one away from tormented. So it's just going to keep going back and forth if you just hold down Rain of Arrows and then click Void Arrow every time it's up. The next one we have Void Arrow applies wormholes. This is a debuff that puts on the targets and it doesn't go away. It stays there until you kill the enemy or you kill some other enemies. And what we actually make it do is whenever you kill an enemy affected by wormhole, which is this one here, the closest non-boss enemy is instantly absorbed into the oblivion. And so this can absorb elites, doesn't matter. You can have something that has, 12 billion HP, and then you kill something that has 10 HP, it's going to absorb the 12 billion thing. And it just helps smooth out the damage and kill really tanky stuff very easily. It also helps that we're doing poison, because the poison will randomly pick off enemies that will die, and then they'll take another enemy with them. We also have the consecrated ground on the Vindictive Slam, which as enemies stand in that ground, they will die, and it will absorb other ones. Also, when the hammers fall, they deal damage into like an area. So the new Vindictive Slam, the way it works is whenever a Vindictive Slam is targeted on an enemy, it can't target that same enemy again. So if you have a group of enemies, it will target one and it will splash to everything in that area. And it will target another and splash. So there's a lot of overlapping circles that are falling from the ground and holy ground that just helps clean up everything, and just screens explode when things proc. So that's Void Arrow. Let's also talk about Rain of Arrows. So this is the secondary skill we use. You could use any skill. This one just gives me the most utility, and it has about the same cooldown. So it's been very nice to play with. This just makes Rain of Arrows faster. This one pulls in enemies within a radius, so helps pull them in so all the hammers are overlapping on everything and stunning everything constantly. This one makes it to where it deals increased damage, but our raw damage is reduced to 0, so it actually does 0 here. If we switch to Ellie, it does damage, but I want the pull, so I'm not looking to do damage here. Really don't need any of these. This one puts them in a line though, and I didn't want them to be pulled away from me. This one reduces the area effect, so I didn't want that one, but you could just reduce this one. But it also doesn't have any mana cost associated with it, so it doesn't really matter. This one you could pick between two, so I do the critical strike here, because even with 0 damage you can crit, and you can ancestral crit, which allows you to get Thornbite stacks, so I would recommend getting the crit. If you want some more utility, you can go for the slow. And lastly, this one does damage for each volley before it. It doesn't matter. This one also doesn't matter because you need to be delighted, and we are going to be tormented all the time. Now, as far as our mastery goes, our specialization, we are doing the turret. So this gives us flat mana. Mana is equal to my evasion. So what happens is we're stacking evasion. Evasion gives us mana, which doesn't really do much for us, but it is mana. That's free. And then our evasion's turned to armor. Our armor's turned to LE resist. Blah, blah, blah. It just works out really well. We're getting some area increased size in the second row. So this just makes the hammers larger area and helps our rain of arrows pull in more enemies. Next, we have when your serenity should be lowered by 2, it's lowered to 3 instead. So if we mess up our sequencing in torment, out of torment, this will just help us get back in there faster. This row is just extra LE damage. The rest don't matter. This one gives our arrow shot, or our void arrow and our rain of arrows poison. That gives us that damage over time that scales with our cape. This one here is probably the most important one. This gives us LE resist equal to 68% of our LE damage. So this just helps to get a ton of defense. It's not really needed, but it just helps have the extra resist to stack up Thornbite that much faster. And it gives you more LE resist, which on the Reaper gives you more damage. So it's perfect. We stack damage, and then we also get LE resist that gives us more damage. So very nice. I mentioned this one earlier. We get 10 pierce, 10 fork, and 10 rebound for our void arrow. And then lastly, while tormented, you ignore the first time. Your serenity should be increased. If you don't have life leech on gear, you go for the life leech here. All right, so let's talk about the downsides of the build. So the only real downsides of the build are it can feel clunky at times. If there's not a ton of enemies, then it's hard to kill that last enemy. You'll basically be relying on Soul Eating Mantle to kill the last enemy because your black holes won't really do much because there's only one enemy. And if it's super tanky, then you basically have to wait for your dots to deal enough damage to kill it, which only happens every so often, but it is very noticeable when it does happen. I wouldn't say it's a deal breaker for the build at all. It's just something to be aware of. And the only other thing is it kind of requires a lot of gear for this build to work, but I think it's a very good build. It's just you have to get your crit chance high. You want a lot of rebound. You want a lot of ancestral crit strike. You want ancestral strike damage. You want a lot of evasion. So you kind of see what I'm saying. You kind of need everything. But as you add more and more to the build, you get multiple benefits. Whereas you add life to the build, you get extra flat, which gets times by all the LE. It also gets multiplied by your helm. You add extra evasion, you get more armor. More armor gives you more LE resist. More elemental damage gives you more LE resist as well, which gives you more Thornbite. And all of those things are used for the actual Reaper, which gives you that chance to stun, chance to proc, increase size, increase damage. So it's a very cool build. I really like it. It's the best thing I could come up with to actually use Void Arrow. which I think is just a really cool skill. I hope we get some more legendaries in the future that can maybe augment this a little better. But it's very cool. So anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the build guide. And yeah, I'm going to keep working on some builds. Have some more guides out in the future. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.